There's a collection of love stories of people get lost, get crazy, and disoriented in the name of love. Luther and the Slow Walk of Love. What is the marriage reveals about commitment today? Part 2.
Yes, Biblical Man wrote an interesting article on Substack entitled Luther Didn't Love His Wife When He Married Her. If Luther's marriage embodies the lived reality of covenantal love and Chrysostom supplies its moral logic, the early church had already given this vision its theological architecture. What later reformers and preachers described narratively, Augustine articulated structurally. Long before modern debates about romance, compatibility, or emotional fulfillment, Augustine asks a more fundamental question: what actually holds a marriage together over time? His answer did not begin with passion, preference, or personality, but with permanence, an objective bond that forms the conditions under which affection can mature rather than the reward for its spontaneous appearance. It is here, in Augustine's careful distinction of marriage's goods, that the covenantal priority moves from pastoral wisdom into doctrinal clarity.
Clarity indeed. So, Mr. Mick, how did Augustine address the marital question?
Augustine made a similar distinction in discussing the three goods of marriage. The sacramentum, the sacred bond, took precedence precisely because it was objective and permanent, regardless of subjective experience. In his On the Good of Marriage, Augustine warned against marriages motivated by carnal concupiscence, what we might call a romantic passion as an end in itself. Not because passion is evil, but because making it foundational creates instability. The marriage makes friends of those who are married, he wrote, but this friendship develops through covenant commitment, not as a precondition. The critical distinction between romantic and covenant love becomes clearest when we examine how each handles four essential dimensions of marriage: initiation, commitment, satisfaction, and purpose. Regarding initiation, romantic love requires a strong attraction and compatibility assessment before commitment. You must fall in love first, and this falling is essentially passive. It happens to you based on chemistry beyond your control. The covenant approach, as we saw with Luther, permits and even encourages marriage based on character assessment, circumstances, and wisdom, even without overwhelming emotional attraction. Compatibility is something you build through commitment, not something you discover before it. The Jewish tradition of arranged marriages reflected this covenant priority. While contemporary Westerners often viewed arranged marriages as oppressive, research by psychologist Robert Epstein compared arranged marriages in India with love marriages in America and found no significant difference in long term satisfaction, and some evidence that satisfaction in arranged marriages increased over time while love marriages showed the opposite trend. Why? Because covenant love grows through investment, while romantic love struggles when initial intensity fades. Regarding commitment, romantic love is inherently conditional, dependent on continued feelings, growth, and fulfillment. If those fade, the relationship's legitimacy is questioned. The logic becomes: if I no longer feel in love, perhaps this isn't my real partner. Perhaps my soulmate is still out there. Covenant love, by contrast, is unconditional within the covenant's bounds. The commitment exists independent of feelings or satisfaction. As Jesus taught regarding marriage, what God has joined together, let not man separate. The joining creates an objective reality that exists regardless of subjective experience. This unconditional commitment isn't oppressive, but liberating. Paradoxically, knowing your spouse cannot leave creates safety for vulnerability, as we explored earlier. Romantic love's conditionality creates constant insecurity. If I disappoint him, will they leave? If someone better comes along, will I be abandoned? This insecurity actually prevents the deep vulnerability necessary for genuine intimacy. Regarding satisfaction, romantic love makes personal fulfillment central. The relationship exists primarily to make both partners happy, satisfied, and actualized. If it fails to do so, something is wrong. Either you chose poorly or the relationship has run its course. Covenant love certainly values mutual well being and appropriate happiness, but these are byproducts of faithfulness rather than primary goals. The question isn't, am I happy, but am I faithful? Am I growing in virtue? Are we fulfilling our purpose? Proverbs 21:9 notes that it is better to live in a corner of the housetop than in a house, shared with a quarrelsome wife. Acknowledging that marriage isn't always pleasant, yet the biblical response to a difficult marriage is never, perhaps you should find someone more compatible, but rather wisdom on patience, communication, and character growth. The assumption is that the covenant remains regardless of satisfaction level. This doesn't mean tolerating abuse. The covenant itself contains limits, and safety is legitimate. But it means that mere disappointment, boredom, or feeling unfulfilled aren't grounds for questioning the marriage. These are invitations to maturity and growth. C.S. Lewis wrote in Mere Christianity, being in love first moved them to promise fidelity. This quieter love enables them to keep the promise. It is on this love that the engine of marriage is run. Being in love was the explosion that started it. Regarding purpose, romantic love is primarily about the mutual fulfillment of both partners. It's a closed dyadic system serving the couple's happiness. Covenant love is purposeful beyond itself. Biblical marriage exists for children's sake, for bearing witness to covenant faithfulness and community, for mutual sanctification, for creating stable households that contribute to flourishing, and ultimately for imagining God's faithful love for his people. This external purpose actually strengthens the marriage. Modern research consistently finds that couples with shared purpose beyond their relationship, religious commitment, shared mission, parenting, community service, report higher satisfaction than couples focus primarily on each other's happiness. Viktor Frankl's work on meaning suggests why. Humans thrive when pursuing purpose beyond themselves, and marriages oriented toward external goods avoid the claustrophobia of mutual introspection. The early Christians understood marriage as fundamentally purposeful. When Tertullian described Christian marriage to his wife, he emphasized shared worship, service, and mission. How beautiful the marriage of two Christians, two who are one in hope, one in desire, one in discipline, one in the same service. Both are brethren, both fellow servants. There is no separation between them and the spirit or flesh. Nay, they are truly two in one flesh. The unity he describes emerges from shared purpose and covenant commitment, not from mutual emotional satisfaction. Now, I anticipate the objection, but don't you want passion? Don't you want chemistry and romance? Isn't covenant love settling for a loveless arrangement? This misunderstands the relationship between covenant and passion. Covenant love doesn't exclude passion. It provides the framework within which passion can safely flourish over decades rather than burning out quickly. The Song of Solomon celebrates erotic passion within marriage. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is better than wine. But notice the context. This is passion within covenant commitment, not passion as the basis for commitment. The ancient Jewish and Christian readings always understood the song as celebrating marital love, not premarital infatuation. The security of the covenant creates space for passion without the anxiety of romantic love's conditionality. Luther's own marriage bears this out. The passionate affection he eventually felt for Katerina was more intense, not less, than if he had married based on initial attraction. Why? Because it grounded in reality rather than fantasy, proven through trials rather than merely imagined, and secure in commitment rather than anxious about its continuity. His frequent praise of Katerina in later letters reflects genuine delight, not dutiful performance. Research on long-term marriages consistently finds that couples who prioritize commitment over feelings report more satisfaction and passion over time. The psychologist Scott Stanley has documented that commitment-based decision-making in relationships predicts stability and satisfaction better than satisfaction-based decision-making. Couples who decide to stay married because they're committed, even when not currently satisfied, end up both more stable and more satisfied than couples who stay only while currently satisfied. This isn't to say romantic love is entirely worthless. Initial attraction and emotional connections can certainly be good gifts when placed within proper priority. The problem is making them foundational. It's the difference between saying, I marry you because I love you, romantic priority, versus I promise to love you, therefore I marry you, covenant priority. The former makes commitment dependent on feeling, the latter makes feeling develop within commitment. The church fathers would recognize our contemporary romantic ideal as a form of idolatry, making the beloved responsible for our own happiness, meaning, and identity in ways that truly belong only to God. Augustine warned against this precisely in his Confessions, describing his youthful affair. I was in love with loving. I sought an object for my love. I was in love with loving. This is romantic love's fundamental error, loving the experience of love more than the actual person, seeking fulfillment through relationship rather than seeking the other's good. Covenant love avoids this idolatry by properly ordering loves. God remains central. Spouse serves as partner in pursuing God's purposes together, and the marriage serves goods beyond itself. This doesn't diminish the spouse's importance, but locates it in rightly. As C.S. Lewis wrote in The Four Loves, when I have learnt to love God better than my earthly dearest, I shall love my earthly dearest better than I do now. The practical implications are profound. If romantic love is primary, then what feelings fade as they inevitably do, the marriage is in crisis. But if covenant love is primary, then fading feelings are simply a season requiring faithfulness, not a fundamental problem. If romantic love is primary, then finding someone more compatible or more exciting threatens the marriage. But if covenant love is primary, such temptation is merely temptation, and that's it, something to resist in faithfulness to vows. The biblical metaphor for marriage is consistently covenantal. Christ in the church, God in Israel, the marriage supper of the Lamb. Never is the metaphor romantic in our modern sense. Never is it about mutual feeling satisfaction or finding your perfect match. It's always about faithful commitment, creating a loving relationship over time through sacrifice and grace. In conclusion, covenant love isn't settling for less than romantic love. It's choosing the sturdy foundation on which genuine love, including passion and romance, can actually be built to last, which leads us naturally to ask how we actively practice this in our modern context.
Mr. Mick, this is all sounds compelling theoretically, but how do we actually live this way? What does the choosing covenant love of a romantic love like practically in how we date, choose our spouse, and navigate marriage today? In short, what is a phase one?
The gap between understanding covenant love intellectually and practicing it concretely is precisely where most people struggle, especially given our culture's total saturation with romantic assumptions. We need practical wisdom for three distinct phases: the discernment process before marriage, the decision to marry, and the daily practice of marriage itself. Each phase requires intentional resistance to romantic culture's default patterns and deliberate cultivation of covenantal thinking. Phase one is the covenantal approach radically reframes the purpose of dating. Romantic culture treats dating as a process of finding the one, that special person whose compatibility is so perfect that marriage will feel natural and effortless. You're supposed to know when you know, trust your feelings, and follow your heart. The covenant approach treats dating as discernment about readiness and suitability for covenant commitment, a much more sober assessment. First, assess your own readiness for a covenant before assessing compatibility with another. Paul's instructions in 1 Corinthians 7 8 through 9 is crucial here. To the unmarried and the widows, I say that it is good for them to remain single, as I am. But if they cannot exercise self control, they should marry. Notice Paul doesn't say, if you find someone who makes you feel complete, but rather, if you cannot exercise self control. The implication is clear. Marriage is for people mature enough to handle sexual desire responsibly and committed enough to honor covenant obligations, not for people seeking emotional completion. This means doing honest self assessment. Have I developed basic life competencies, financial stability, emotional regulation, relational skills? Do I understand what covenant commitment actually requires? Am I willing to sacrifice personal preferences for another's good? Can I handle conflict constructively? Have I addressed my own significant wounds and dysfunctions? Or am I expecting a spouse to heal them? Jumping into marriage, seeking someone to complete you, is romantic thinking that sets up devastating disappointment. Second, assess character and virtue more than chemistry and compatibility. Romantic culture says to prioritize how someone makes you feel. The covenant approach says to assess who someone actually is, regardless of how they make you feel. Proverbs repeatedly emphasizes character assessment. A wife of noble character, who can find? She is worth far more than rubies. The entire Proverbs 31 description focuses on virtue, competence, and character, not on feelings she inspires. Practically, this means asking questions like, does this person demonstrate faithfulness in existing commitments, work, friendships, family? How do they handle difficulty, conflict, and disappointment? Do they take responsibility for their faults or blame others? Are they growing in virtue or stagnant? Do they honor their word? What's their relationship with money, authority, and temptation? Do they serve others or expect to be served? John Chrysostom's advice remains remarkably practical. When you are about to marry, do not look at wealth, do not look at beauty, do not look at social rank. Look at piety, gentleness, and knowledge of household management. Notice the focus on observable, practical virtues, things that actually matter for covenant partnership. He's not saying attraction doesn't matter at all, but it shouldn't dominate the assessment. Third, involve community wisdom rather than relying solely on private feelings. Romantic culture treats relationship decisions as intensely private between two people whose feelings matter most. The biblical pattern consistently involves family and community. Isaac's marriage to Rebekah involves Abraham's servant and family approval. Ruth's marriage to Boaz involved community elders and legal proceedings. Even Mary and Joseph's betrothal followed community customs and family arrangements. This doesn't mean returning to arranged marriage, but it does mean seeking input from parents, mentors, and mature friends who know you well, listening when trusted people raise concerns about someone you're dating, submitting your assessment to those who can see blind spots you can't, and recognizing that marriage isn't just about two people, but involves families and communities who have legitimate interest. Ignatius of Antioch's instructions to Polycarp specifically mentions this communal dimension. It is fitting for men and women who marry to be united with the consent of the bishop, that the marriage may be according to the Lord and not according to lust. While we may not seek a bishop's consent, the principle applies. Marriage should have communal blessing and accountability, not just private feeling. Fourth, date with purpose and clarity rather than casual experimentation. The romantic approach encourages dating lots of people to find yourself and discover what you want, treating each relationship as primarily about your own development. The covenant approach recognizes that every intimate relationship shapes you and creates obligations. So dating should be purposeful rather than experimental. Practically, this means being clear about your intentions from early on. Are you assessing marriage potential or just enjoying companionship? Avoiding physical intimacy that creates bonding before commitment exists, maintaining appropriate boundaries that preserve freedom to exit without devastation, and ending relationships that clearly won't lead to marriage rather than prolonging them indefinitely. Paul's instruction about avoiding sexual immorality isn't arbitrary prudishness. It's recognition that sexual intimacy creates bonds that should exist only within a covenant. Modern attachment research confirms this. Sexual involvement increases an oxytocin bonding that can override rational assessment of compatibility, essentially getting the cart before the horse. Fifth, accept that you're choosing a sinner to covenant with, and so are they. Romantic culture seeks perfection. The person who meets all needs, has no major flaws, and creates effortless happiness. The covenant approach acknowledges that you're choosing which sins and struggles you're willing to accept and work with, just as they're doing with yours. This isn't pessimism, but realism. Augustine's teaching on marriage emphasized that all marriages are between sinners. Even the marriages of believers are exposed to countless troubles from the defects of human nature. The question isn't whether your potential spouse has flaws, everyone does, but whether that particular character, virtues, and struggles are the ones you can faithfully covenant with. Can you respect them despite their weakness? Can you serve their growth? Can you live with their particular quirks? In conclusion, phase one is critical, but there are more important steps to consider.
That is phase one, people. Phase one. So, in deciding to marry Mr. Meg, what is the difference between a romantic and covenantal approach?
When romantic culture tells you that you should feel certain, that true love means having no doubts, it's setting you up for paralysis or regret. The covenant approach recognizes that marriage is a leap of faith based on reasonable assessment, not perfect certainty. First, recognize that the decision to marry someone is exactly that, a decision, not a discovery. You're not finding the one who's cosmically ordained. You're choosing someone to covenant with. Multiple people might make suitable spouses, but what matters is whether you're willing to commit to this particular person and build a life together. Luther's decision to marry Katharina exemplifies this. He wasn't swept away by destiny. He made a deliberate choice based on circumstances, character assessment, and commitment to follow through. The fact that their marriage became deeply loving didn't validate some hidden cosmic compatibility. It demonstrated that covenant commitment creates love through practice. Second, make the decision based on sustainable factors rather than passionate feelings. Feelings are important data, but terrible foundations. Instead, ask, do we share compatible life purposes and values? Are we sexually attracted enough for a healthy marriage? Do we have compatible approaches to money, children, family, work, and faith? Can we resolve conflicts constructively? Do we bring out virtue in each other or vice? Are our families supportive? Can we imagine building a life with this person 20, 40, 60 years from now? Tertullian's description of Christian marriage emphasized these sustainable factors. How beautiful the marriage of two Christians. There's shared hope, desire, discipline, and service, objective, observable compatibilities rather than subjective feelings. Third, marry when ready and suitable, not when feelings reach maximum intensity. Paul's teaching permits marriage not as ultimate fulfillment, but as a responsible option for managing desire and partnerships. Fourth, this understand that marriage itself is the beginning of building compatibility and confirmation of discovered compatibility. Luther and Katharina weren't perfectly compatible on their wedding day. They became compatible through years of adapting to each other, serving each other, and growing together. In conclusion, marriage is a thoughtful response to the seriousness of commitment.
Seriousness of commitment. Yes, definitely. And Mr. Meg, is it true that marriage solves all, or people live happily ever after?
If only it were that simple. The covenant approach transforms how you navigate every dimension of married life, from communication to conflict to intimacy. First, prioritize covenant faithfulness over emotional satisfaction in decision making. Paul's command that spouses not deprive each other sexually exemplifies this principle. Your body belongs to covenant partnership, not just to your own preferences. Second, practice the one flesh reality intentionally. Genesis 2:24 says married couples become one flesh. That's an ontological truth about what marriage creates, not just a romantic metaphor. Third, cultivate sustained practices of covenant renewal and appreciation. Practically, this includes regular verbal affirmations and appreciation of your spouse. Fourth, fight for the marriage in conflict, not just for being right. Conflict is inevitable between sinners, but covenant commitment changes conflict's purpose. Fifth, cultivate shared spiritual life and purpose beyond yourselves. A marriage that focuses only on the couple's mutual satisfaction becomes claustrophobic and unstable. Sixth and last, accept seasons of difficulty as normal rather than signs of failure. In conclusion, these are important daily practices for a successful marriage.
Yes, successful marriage. Well, Mr. Meg, to sum up, what are we to learn from Luther's experience?
Ultimately, the union of Martin Luther and Catherine von Bora served as a practical laboratory for Augustine's structural theology. What began as a defiant social act, a former monk marrying a runaway nun to spite the Pope and provide for a displaced woman, transformed into a profound school of character that validated the early church's vision of domestic holiness. Luther's marriage proved that when the architecture of permanence is laid first, affection has the safety to ripen up into what the reformers called social necessity or companionship. Luther famously remarked, "There is no more lovely, friendly, or charming relationship, communion, or company than a good marriage." Catherine, whom he affectionately called the Morning Star of Wittenberg, managed the finances, the brewery, and the chaotic household of the cloister. In the language of modern trauma research and psychology, their marriage moved from a contract of convenience to a secure attachment. Their relationship mirrors the steady, driving rhythm of 1960s soul ballad. Think of the enduring grit of an Otis Redding track or the deep walking bass line of Johnny Cash's I Walk the Line. It wasn't a flighty pop melody, it was a soul saturated commitment that refused to drift when the mood faded. Luther's final years were marked by a deep dependence on Katie, proving that a covenant is not a cage, but the very ground upon which the melody of life can finally become a song. In conclusion, they showed the world that marriage is not the reward for finding a perfect love, but the sacred architecture required to build one.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world, Mr. Meg. Thank you, thank you. Luther in the slow walk of love, well, examines a model of love defined not by a spectacle or speed, but by the patience, loyalty, and quiet endurance. In an age driven by instant gratification and public validations, Luther's marriage stands as the countercultural testament to the power of choosing the same person daily through growth, struggle, and change. Mr. Mike, would you like to plug in something?
I appreciate the opportunity. Write the book, grow the business. Connect with me on LinkedIn. GMick, the Dr. Digital Smith, PhD. Listen to the Dr. Digital podcast. Also pick up a couple of volumes I have on Amazon. That's On Track, Ian Hunter, and Burning America.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Ming, the Dr. Digital, and please do listen to our other podcasts, our Mental Health 101, our Love Letters, Music 101, and of course, Sex 101. So, Mr. Ming, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, my friend. Till next time, Deus Volt.
More to come, people. See you soon.